Andye was only in Paris for 3 days. On day 1, she jumped aboard the metro train, in a decision that would change her life. It was September 2016. Andye, born in Haiti and brought up in the US, was 25 and finishing a master's degree in the Netherlands. She was in that in-between phase of a degree when studies are over, but graduation is still to come. For more relationships-related news and videos, check out Relationships. I decided, I'm just going to travel for a month and then come back to Amsterdam, Andye tells CNN Travel. Andye planned a month's adventure exploring Italy, Greece, Egypt, and India. On her way back, she returned via Paris to visit a close friend, Sina, who lived in the French capital and was looking after some of Andye's belongings. I got on the metro to head back to my friend's house where I dropped off my suitcases, Andye recalls to CNN Travel. And that's where he got on. He was Stephen, a 26-year-old master's student originally from the Central African Republic studying in Paris and working part-time in a school. When Stephen boarded the train, the carriage was already full, so he had to stand. Andye was sitting, her backpack on her knee and her headphones on. Stephen noticed her right away. I found her really beautiful, Stephen tells CNN Travel. A few stops went by, the carriage emptied out, seats freed up and Stephen ended up sitting opposite Andye. He kept glancing her way, and she seemed to be looking at him too. Their eyes kept meeting. Andye also noticed Stephen amid the crowds of travelers. We just kept looking at each other, she recalls. He would turn around to look at me, and I would look away, and we just kept on doing that for like a good 15 minutes, just staring at each other and looking away. First conversation. As the train sped under the Parisian streets, Stephen tried to think of a way to broach conversation with the girl with the backpack. He wanted to speak to her, but he was also conscious of respecting her space and privacy. Meanwhile, Andye was silently fantasizing about the stranger opposite her. He had really nice, muscular arms. I was like, wow, he looks like someone I could really get a nice hug from, she said. I was like, what if he's my husband, but I'll never know? Because I'm going to get off this train without ever speaking to him. Then, at some point, when our eyes finally caught each other, and neither of us turned back, I saw his lips move. So I removed one of my headphones. In French, Stephen was suggesting Andye could move her heavy-looking backpack onto the now vacant seat next to her. Andye, fluent in French, replied that it wasn't necessary, the bag wasn't heavy. And then the conversation continued. Andye said. Stephen asked if Andye was a student, because of the backpack, and she told him about her studies. He explained he was also working towards a master's degree. At some point, I had to get off the train to transfer, and he asked if he could get off with me. And I said, you can do as you please, and he said. We just kept talking as they got off the train together. Stephen offered to help carry her backpack. I felt a bit nervous because I didn't know him and I thought about how he could run away with my bag, says Andye. But my gut felt comfortable enough to allow him to take it. The two waited for the next subway station together, Stephen holding the backpack. Then they got on the next train together and sat next to one another. We just kept on talking, says Andye. That's when we realized that we actually were doing our masters in the same field of study, sustainable development, and we started talking about that a bit. When the train arrived at Andye's stop, Stephen got off with her and handed her the backpack. They exchanged numbers, then Stephen asked if he could give her a hug goodbye. Andye agreed. I thought that was so weird, because in France people just do the kisses on the cheek, they don't hug, recalls Andye. I was like, wow, what if this guy is a mind reader? Because earlier I was just thinking I could get a really nice hug from him. After their hug, the two went their separate ways. Later that evening, Stephen messaged Andye, and nervously waited for a reply. When she responded, I screamed and ran to my cousin, says Stephen, recalling announcing that Andye was the woman he would marry. Andye and Stephen messaged back and forth all evening, trying to figure out if they could meet up again before Andye returned to Amsterdam. She had a tight schedule, and at first suggested it would be easier to meet in a few weeks. After graduation she planned to return to Paris for a week before she headed home to the US. Even if we see each other for just a quick second, I really want to see you before you leave," wrote Stephen in response. Eventually, the two settled on meeting for a quick dinner on Andye's last evening. Stephen wanted to impress Andye and take her to a swanky restaurant, but Andye wanted to make sure she wouldn't be late home, given she was traveling the next day. They settled on a casual fast food spot, right next to the metro stop where they parted the first time. When they saw one another again, both Andye and Stephen felt excited. "I felt butterflies in my stomach," says Stephen. "We did the usual French greeting with one kiss on each cheek aka la bise," recalls Andye, who remembers trying to temper her excitement, given her imminent return to the US. Inside the restaurant, the two settled into conversation quickly. "We started talking and getting to know each other a bit," recalls Andye. Stephen was straightforward with Andye, explaining he was looking for a relationship. "I thought that was like, whoa, first date, like you're doing too much for me. But I appreciated his sincerity," says Andye. "We kept on talking and I got, again, that kind of like, calm feeling being around him." Andye's original plan to keep the evening short no longer seemed so important. She suggested they go into the center of Paris to a bar. Later, Stephen accompanied Andye back to her friend's apartment, where, outside the door, they kissed. Then Stephen returned to where he lived, further into the suburbs of Paris. It was later than he'd realized, and trains had stopped running, so he walked most of the way. He didn't mind, he was just caught up in the excitement and romance of the evening. Meanwhile, Andye excitedly told Sina about the date and how well it went. "Then the next day I left to go to Amsterdam, but we kept in touch. He was messaging me the whole time I was there," recalls Andye. After graduation, Andye returned to Paris for a brief stopover before her return to the US. Once again, she arranged to meet Stephen at the metro stop by Sina's apartment. The two hopped on the train together and went for a stroll along the Champs-Élysées, through the Trocadero area and towards the Eiffel Tower. Andye and Stephen tried to see each other as much as they could during those few days, often riding the metro together. On one of these journeys, Stephen turned to Andye and said he didn't want her to return to the US. "Why?" asked Andye. "Because I love you," said Stephen. "How can you love me? You don't even know me," said Andye. No future plans. Andye boarded her flight to the US at the end of September, with no imminent plans to return to Europe. "We didn't make plans to meet up, we kind of held hope that we were gonna see each other again, at some point," says Andye. "We decided that we're going to keep in touch, and just keep writing to each other and talking," says Stephen. 3 months later, Andye began working with an international organization based in Washington, D.C. The role involved business travel. Serendipitously, flights often included a layover in Paris. In March 2017, 6 months after their first metro encounter, Stephen and Andye reunited at Charles de Gaulle Airport for Andye's 24-hour stopover. In the intervening months, the two had been in constant communication, but it wasn't the same as finally seeing one another in person again. "We talked a lot, we hugged a lot," says Stephen of their reunion. But before long they were saying goodbye again. Andye's role involved traveling to West Africa every 3 months or so. She figured that each time, she would try to incorporate a Paris layover. But Stephen felt guilty. Andye was the one always traveling. He didn't have a visa to travel to the US, so he couldn't reciprocate the trips. "It was getting complicated," he says. "Because it was always Andye who would have had to travel, I thought it would have been even more complicated later on in the process." Stephen didn't communicate these worries to Andye, but she sensed something was up. "I just remember him being less attentive, really distant. And I said, look, if you're not into this, let's just end it," she said. "I am not going to chase you. I love you. But I don't like one-sided relationships." Meeting again a couple of months passed. Andye and Stephen didn't talk during this period, but they both thought about one another often. Meanwhile, Andye planned a trip to Paris to visit her friend Sina. "I'm usually the kind of person, like once it's over, it's over. But with him I felt like this was more kind of a break than a breakup," says Andye. "I had Sina kind of reach out to him to see if he was okay. and tell him that I was coming to France for a week for vacation. Steven and Andye arranged to meet up. We talked a lot. We went out dancing, and then we kind of got back to how things were before, she says. I was in Paris for at least 4 to 5 days and we spent most of the time together. Steven says, at that moment I thought to myself, if I don't make it work, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. The two spoke candidly about the situation, with Andye explaining she didn't mind that she was always the one traveling, given she could incorporate visits into work trips. They parted on stronger terms. I was really easy and confident in our relationship after that visit, but I do think that it took a while for me to warm back up into it, says Andye. When they came back together again, Andye was firm. She told Steven they both had to be all in. I was like, look, I don't have time to play games. If this is what you want to do, it's not for me. I was very strict on my boundaries, she said. I told him, if you're really serious about this, here's my mom's number. You let her know that you're serious about her daughter. Within a week, Steven had sent a long message to Andye's mother. I tried to tell her a bit about myself, Steven explains. I said I was serious about Andye. The message had the effect of taking Andye and Steven's relationship to the next level. They started talking about what country they might live in the future, and plans for marriage. The next time they reunited in France, in November 2017, Andye built a week's vacation into her stopover. The proposal during this trip, Steven proposed. When I met Andye, I felt at peace, in sync with all of nature's elements, says Steven. But when I wanted to propose to her, I felt a wave of different feelings. I was asking myself what I would do if she said no, and at the same time, I was excited at the idea that she would accept to be my wife. Andye accepted Steven's proposal. I got that same calm feeling that I had that first day that I met him, says Andye of the moment she said yes. The couple kept the news to themselves for a short while, first telling Sina and, later, Steven's best friend. The two decided to enjoy the engagement for a while, and not rush into marriage. They continued their long-distance romance and, the following summer, Andye spent 4 months in France with Steven, having quit her job. It was a really wonderful summer, says Andye, recalling quality time spent with Steven, his family and friends. Living together, the couple had previously figured it made most sense for Andye to move to France. But after she struggled to find a France-based job, the couple started discussing the possibility of living in the US instead. Almost a year later, in July 2019, Steven's fiancée visa was approved. To celebrate, the couple went to Haiti, where they were inspired to plan their own Haiti-based wedding celebration. Steven and Andye started their American life in a tiny studio apartment in D.C. They had a small wedding at a court office on September 16, 2019, the 3-year anniversary of their metro meeting, while anticipating a larger celebration in Haiti the following year. Both were thrilled to be living together after years of long distance. They started a company together, life.It, creating handmade apparel using African fabric. In summer 2021, the couple relocated to Florida, enticed by the idea of more space, warm weather and proximity to the beach. They feel, says Andye, at peace in Florida. Anniversary plans since the world has opened up after the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. They visited Tanzania, Zanzibar and Costa Rica together. When their Haiti wedding celebration was cancelled, the couple decided to start a tradition where they plan a holiday to coincide with their anniversary. Right now, they're in Mexico celebrating 6 years since their metro meeting and 3 years since their courthouse wedding. One of the things that is symbolic is when we're traveling, he likes to ask me if he can carry my backpack, says Andye, adding Steven has been carrying her bag since day one. While the couple think they were fated to meet on the metro that day, they both have moments when they marvel at what happened. There are days where I say to him, God, I'm married to a stranger that I met on the train in Paris, she says. Honestly, I feel like I am living a rom-com with him. Steven adds, what if I was late to take the train, what would have happened? It's destiny that brought us together. For more engaging lifestyle. And finally, thank you all for watching the video. Please like and comment your opinion so we can discuss together. Don't forget to subscribe, press the bell to follow and update many other interesting news. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.